One day, when Wanaboozu returned to his wigwam after a long journey, he'd miss his young brother who lived with him. He called his brother's name, but heard no answer. Looking around on the sand from his tracks, Wanaboozu was startled by the tracks of Mishikinipig. He then knew that his brother had been seized by his enemy. Wanaboozu picked up his bow and arrows and followed the tracks of the serpent. He passed the great river, climbed mountains, and crossed over valleys until he came to the shores of the deep and gloomy lake, known as the Spirit Lake, but also known for the Lake of Devils. The trail of Meshiganebig led to the edge of the water. Wanaboozu could see, at the bottom of the lake, the house of Meshiganebig. It was filled with evil spirits, who were his servants and his companions. Their forms were monstrous and terrible indeed. Most of them, like their master, resembled the serpents. In the center of this horrible group was Meshiganebig himself, coiled his terrifying length all around the brother of Wanaboozu. The head of the serpent was red as blood. His furious eyes glowed like fire. His entire body was armed with hard and glistening scales of every color and shade. Looking down on those twisted spirits of evil, Wanaboozu made up his mind that he would get revenge on them for the death of his brother. He said to the clouds, "Disappear," and the clouds went out of sight. "Winds, be still at once," and the winds became still. When the air over the lake of the evil spirits had become stagnant, Wanaboozu said to the sun, "Shine over the lake with all the furiousness you can. Make the water boil." In these ways, thought Wanaboozu, he could force out Meshiganebig to seek the cool shade of the trees grown on the shore of the lake. There he would seize the enemy and get revenge. After giving his orders, Wanaboozu took his bow and arrows and placed himself near the spot where he thought the serpents would come to enjoy the shade. Then he changed himself into a broken stump of a withered tree. The winds became still, the air stagnant, and the sun shot hot rays from the cloudless skies. In time, the water of the lake became troubled, and bubbles rose from the surface. The rays of the sun had penetrated to the home of the serpents. As the water bubbled and foamed, the serpent lifted his head above the center of the lake and gazed around the shores. Soon other serpents came to the surface. Both listened to the footsteps of Wanaboozu, but they heard him nowhere. "Wanaboozu is sleeping," they said to each other, and then they plunged under the waters, which seemed to hiss as they closed over the evil spirits. Not long after, the lake became more troubled. Its water boiled from the very depths, and the hot waves dashed wildly against the rocks on its banks. Soon, Meshiganebig came slowly to the surface of the water and moved towards the shore. His blood-red crest glowed. The reflection of his scales was blinding as the glitter of a sheet-covered forest beneath the winter sun. He was followed by all the evil spirits. So great their number was that they soon covered the shore of the lake. When they saw the broken stump of the withered tree, they suspected that it might be one of the disguises of Wanaboozu. They knew of his cunning, So one of the serpents approached the stump, wrapped his tail around it, and tried to drag it down to the lake. Wanaboozu could hardly keep himself from crying out loud, for the tail of the monster pricked his side. But he stood firm and was silent. The evil spirits moved on. Meshegenebig glided into the forest and wound his many coils around the trees. His companions also found shade, all but one. One remained near the shore to listen for the footsteps of Wanaboozu. From the stump, Wanaboozu watched until all the serpents were asleep and the guard was intently looking in the other direction. Then he silently drew an arrow from his quiver, placed it in his bow, and aimed it at the heart of Meshegenebig. It reached its mark. With a howl that shocked the mountains and startled the wild beasts in their caves, the monster awoke, followed by its terrifying companions, which also were howling with rage and terror. Meshegenebig plunged into the water. At the bottom of the lake, there still lay the body of Wanaboozu's brother. In their fury, the serpents tore it into thousands of pieces. His shredded lungs rose to the surface and covered the lake with whiteness. Meshegenebig soon knew that he would die from his wound, but his companion and him were determined to destroy Wanaboozu. They caused the water from the lake to swell upwards and pound against the shore with the sound of many thunders. Madly, the flood rolled over the land, over the tracks of Wanaboozu, carrying with it rocks and trees. High on the crest of the highest wave floated the wounded Meshegenebig. His eyes glared around him, and his hot breath mingled with the hot breath of his many companions. Wanaboozu, fleeing before the angry waters, thought of his children. He ran through the villages, shouting, "Run to the mountain tops! Meshegenebig is angry and is flooding the earth! Run! Run!" The people caught up their children and found safety on the mountains. Wanaboozu continued his fight along the base of the western hills and then up a high mountain beyond Lake Superior, far to the north. There he found many men and animals that had escaped from the floods that was already covered the valleys and plains and even the highest mountains. Still, water continued to rise. Soon all the mountains were under the flood, except the highest one on which stood Wanaboozu. There he gathered together timber and made a raft. Upon it the men and women and animals with him placed themselves. Almost immediately the mountain top disappeared from their view, and they floated along on the face of the water. For many days they floated. At last the flood began to subside. Soon the people on the raft saw the trees on top of the mountains. Then they saw the mountains and hills, then the plains and the valleys. When the water disappeared from the land, the people who survived learned that Meshegenebig was dead, and that his companions returned to the bottom of the Lake of Devils. There they remain to this day. For fear of Wanaboozu, they have never dared to come forth again.